All right. Welcome to Finance Essentials with Danny Hudson. I am your host, Danny Hudson, and we are here for episode 3 of Entrepreneur Month. Moses, how you doing?
Doing good, doing good. Good to see
Doing
you.
good. So today I've got Moses Herrera with us. And one of the things you're going to find with Moses is he likes to stay busy. I think he's currently got about 71 different businesses that he's involved in. Uh, Not quite that many. But Moses and I actually used to work together at Hilton, and he was one of my directors. And one of the things that I really appreciated and liked about Moses is that he was always very supportive and very motivating. And so even though we actually haven't worked together for several years, he's always been one of those people that I've stayed in contact with. And one of the things we talk about on the podcast is building community and supporting community. And so Moses has been one of those people that I've really been, fortunate enough to be able to have as part of my community. And so it's really been good staying in touch with him over the years. And so it's really happy to kind of be a part of, even if it's just through professional networking or whatever it is, but it's always been good to kind of keep in contact, and seeing what he's up to and whatever things that he's doing to kind of keep that inspiration and that motivation going. So he is an executive coach. He is also a hotel revenue management consultant. And then he is also a spin instructor for Soul Cycle. And I'm just going to jump into it, Moses. My bet is that you use that Soul Cycle energy to kind of help motivate and drive a lot of that other stuff, right?
Yeah, I fell in love totally by accident cycling, mostly because my trainer was like, "Hey, you need to do cardio," and I hate running, so I purely fell in love with it. I will be honest, the first about 10 times on the bike, I hated it, but I
Yeah,
kept going back just because I'm one of those people that needs to keep going.
sure. Now,
And
was that
before
10
you know
times
it, I
instructing or
decided
just 10 times you doing it?
10 times ever being on the bike.
Oh,
Yeah.
gotcha. Okay. All right.
So yeah, I hated it at first 'cause it was hard. It's not easy.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
why.
You get done and you're drenched in
And
sweat and you're sore and you're hurting and you're like, man, that was not nearly as easy as I thought it was going to be.
exactly, exactly. But I think the one thing that kept me coming back was that every single person, I teach this in my classes, and I actually teach this with the businesses and the people that I coach, we all have different paths.
Yep.
So, how you ride the bike and the way I ride the bike may be different, but the
Right.
reason that we ride the bike is the same. So
Yep.
I have a philosophy. The way I ride my bike is the way you ride your life. So if you're not going to challenge yourself, you're not going to push yourself, you're going to understand yourself,
Sure.
discover yourself in that journey,
Sure.
then you're really just pedaling your feet. And
Right.
so in life, we really want to look at ourselves and say, how do we ride ourselves? How do we
Sure.
ride our life?
Sure.
Is really that. So that's what keeps me motivated. And
Yeah.
now I teach, and I teach a lot of people, and it's a blast.
That's great. Do you ever, because like I remember one of the things from spin class was, and this is years ago now, but one of the things always was it's got the knob on there, right? And so, when the
Yes.
person's up there and they're kind of instructing you and they're like, all right, crank it up a full turn. And I'm like, man, I'm kind of winded. I'm gonna do like a quarter of a turn, you know? So do you
Sure.
ever have
Yeah.
clients where you're kind of like, look, I asked you to do a full turn. You only gave me a quarter of a turn. I know you can do better than that.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think, when someone does that, I mean, there are some physical challenges, I think, with everyone, right? So you have to be aware of what those
Sure.
are. But most of the time, it's really a mental challenge.
Yeah.
So, somebody may go back and say, well, I really want to put the full turn. I really want to invest myself fully in this.
Yeah.
But when they come back and say, I only got this many results, or, I only got half the results, but you
Sure.
only did a half turn, well, you're only going to get what you put in. So it
Right.
goes back to that philosophy. The way you ride your bike is the way you ride your life.
Right.
And
Right.
so I always go back and say, if you did a full turn or you were fully invested in it,
Yep.
do you think you can always scale back? And most people are going to be like, yeah, absolutely. You can always change it.
True.
But you don't know your potential until you really push yourself and put
Yeah.
yourself in there.
Yeah. I
So,
know that's, I remember playing golf with a friend of mine. And so one of the things that I was doing was I was putting and all of my putts were short. And I'm like, well, man, I'm just afraid because if I hit it too hard, then this and this and this. And he was looking at me and he was like, dude, he's like, no one's ever made a putt because they hit it too soft. And I'm like, I
Right.
can't argue that. I mean, that's a great point.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
And-
most of us are just so afraid to fail or to fail or to fear a fail.
right.
And that's the only way you learn. I mean,
Sure.
whew, I have failed so many times. I mean, you and I used to talk about this when we worked at Hilton. I'm like, well, if we fail, then we learn, right? We have
Yeah.
something,
Yeah.
we to learn from.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
so I always go back and say, like, we're not here to save your life or anything like that. We're just here to understand what your limits are. So.
Right. Now, and so the executive coaching, I'm assuming that that's something that came out of Hilton. I don't know if you were doing that type of coaching before you were at Hilton, but what is an executive coach, and then how does somebody kind of get that type of a role? Because in my head, I would think most people that are at that executive level, they have their stuff together, right? They're the people that are out there and they're driving business decisions and they're motivating people and they're leading large teams and that kind of thing. And so when I would think of somebody who would need a coach, it an executive wouldn't necessarily always be the first person that I would think of.
That's a great question. And also kind of some of it is a little bit of a misunderstanding. So really, the need for a coach is relevant to all of us.
Sure.
So I actually have two coaches that I work with. One that helps me on some of my personal development things that I want to do. And then I have one that's actually coaches me with my business, who is in the same business as me, that I can learn from, that mentors me.
Sure.
So the purpose of having a coach is really helps you have someone on your side.
Right.
Now, when you work for a company, and most of my clients do, they have a manager they report to, your manager helps you through company directives, company tasks, but it really doesn't. They're not 100% dedicated to you on your personal development. Now they'll support you, saying like, "Go get personally developed," which
Sure.
most managers do.
Right.
But that journey it's a little messy, and you really have to understand who you are, what are you good at, and where are your opportunities, and that takes some deep soul searching. Someone to
Yeah.
really help you, maneuver through some of that. So many of my clients, that's what I do. Yeah, do they bring their personal items into the plate? Absolutely. Do they bring their work opportunities into the plate? Absolutely.
Sure.
Why? Because you are the same person who you are at home or you are at work.
Right.
So we look at them together and we come back and say, what is it that you're working with? What are some of your opportunities? What are the challenges? How do you think we can get through some of that? And I help give them and help them discover tools and resources to make that happen.
Gotcha.
So
that makes sense.
Yeah, I started it when I started consulting with my hotel partners. What I discovered was that they actually had two needs. They didn't just need someone to do the job, they also needed someone to develop their people.
Right.
And they were good at supplying tools and hiring the right candidate. But where they were challenged at was getting them fully embraced, fully developed, so that they were looked upon as a good consultant to their hotels and their stakeholders. Many of them were smart with the technology, but really challenged or were challenged with the competencies that it took to become a good revenue manager or director of revenue to lead their strategy.
Gotcha. And so in that world, then how long were you doing a lot of like the revenue management side of it and the consulting there before you realize you're like, hey, you know what? I actually have a good opportunity for a spin-off business here because I've really been handling one need, but I'm seeing a lot of opportunity for other needs here as well.
Yeah, it was pretty quick within the first 30 days of me
Wow.
acquiring
I was
customers.
not expecting
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I looked at it and I'm like, why are they asking me for these things? So and some people would just go back and say, hey, I think that you need to go refer them out to another business or somebody else. And however, I started looking at who I was and what I had to offer. And one of my strengths that it's always been was not necessarily doing the revenue management work all the time, but it was actually developing people.
Yeah.
It was one of my passions and what I loved. I loved mentoring people. I loved to challenge them. I loved them to look at things differently. And what I realized was that I can be able to do that. So I actually went off into training so that way I had more resources and a network to do that. There are so many different avenues you can go in this side of coaching. So I had to really figure out who I was and who my customers were, or, the people that I can help the most.
Sure.
So I don't work with in the coaching side, I don't really work with that many people in the travel industry. They're in all other sorts of industries.
Sure.
But,
Now,
I'm
was
a
that by
firm
choice or
believer if
just kind
you,
of the way it happened, the way it played out?
I'm a firm believer of if you send out to the universe what you want, it will come because you put yourself out there, right?
Yep.
And I started just networking through online. I tried the whole in-person networking before COVID. Really wasn't successful in that. Maybe I was too ugly or something. I have no idea.
And that's when you're like, I need to
I
be a
scared him
spin
off.
instructor and work on these arms and these quads.
Right.
That's the
I was
other
like,
element I'm missing here.
there we go. Right. It's a work in progress right now. So,
All right, I better make a note of that.
most,
I'm a spin instructor so I can look a little better.
yeah, I realized that most of the people were online. So they started seeing me through different comments or different, I would actually start coaching people through some of their comments through social media.
That's
And some
interesting.
of them found me through Instagram as well.
Right.
And,
And when you're saying two
and then
comments,
some
are you
referrals.
are you saying so one of the things that I've noticed with you is that you're relatively active on LinkedIn. You do a great job as far as blasting out job openings and reposting things that you think that there's a lot of value that can be helpful for others. And when you're saying
Yeah.
comments, is that like you follow people who are very active on LinkedIn, kind of like Twitter? And so you're responding to some of their threads and adding your comments and just interacting and meeting with people that way?
Absolutely. I spend a good amount of time to see who's really active on the platform, how much time they're spending there, and what is the content that's there. So you're right. I did one of the acts of service that I've done after COVID was making sure that people saw job opportunities because that's still an opportunity for us,
Sure.
for many people in our country. But what I also did was I started connecting people. And I made sure, what are some of the things that I can do to help people get connected with other people who may be looking for jobs, who may be
Right.
looking for a service to them, or
Right.
just, education. And in that service, many people started reaching back out to me and saying, "Hey, we saw that you coach. I may need some help here. I've always wanted to have a coach, but I'm not sure how to start."
Sure.
And so that's kind of what I started doing.
No, that's awesome. And I know one of the things that I've noticed, now that I've kind of started to be a little bit more active as far as social media goes from a business standpoint, is that it doesn't take long for you to really notice who is active, who has an active community or an active following, and who doesn't. I'll
Yeah.
follow active news sites. I'll just throw one out there, for example, would be like the Wall Street Journal, right? On Twitter, they'll have 4 million followers, but a post will get 7 likes or, whatever it might be. And I'm looking at
Sure.
that and I'm like, that doesn't look effective at all. Whereas I'll see some other people who have really made that connection with their audience and they may only have 1,000 followers or whatever it might be, but everything that they're doing, it's getting retweeted and 50% of their audience is liking it and commenting and stuff. And I'm looking at that, I'm thinking that's a much better, more successful business model, that connection that they're in, those relationships that they have with their customer base, than someone who is just like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that I have a million followers. And it's like,
Right.
you're not converting any of that. Like no one cares
Right.
about you.
Right.
And so
And there's so many, yeah, there's so many people out there. It's easy to buy followers, right? I mean, it's easy to through algorithms or through bots, and things like that. And I think that I have friends who, and I actually coach an influencer on social media, and he is good at what he does, but also knows exactly who his audience is. So even though he has, I think it's like 75,000 followers,
Sure.
there's really about 5,000 that he's influencing.
Sure.
And through his messaging, he does that. So the same with me. I never bought any,
Right.
but I've built up my audience. and I understand exactly the message that I'm going to send out. So if that's on Instagram, Facebook,
Sure.
or if that's going to be on LinkedIn, and I know you follow me on those, I have a very specific platform that I'm always focusing, or it's around that
Sure.
circle. So when you find like on my Instagram, Facebook, social media, it's really about motivation and utilizing fitness together. It's about the heart, the soul, and the movement of your body. And so I use that core on all my postings. It's always circled around that.
Right.
And when on LinkedIn, it's really about motivating your career. What are skill sets that you can do? What is the
Sure.
networking you can bring in to help drive that?
Gotcha.
So even though they're two different, I would say, core elements of my messaging on the different platforms, but
Right.
the audiences are different, and that's why.
Which is very interesting because I would think, because I'm assuming you don't run three different social media accounts. You're using kind of you as the one that operates all of them, but you have still managed to target a specific audience on a specific platform with the same name that you would use on a different platform where you're actually targeting a completely different audience. I mean, I feel like that
Yeah.
is super smart, because I think a lot of people, including myself, probably try to keep everything as consistent as possible across all of the platforms. And then you find that it ends up being
Sure.
more work, than it is fun, right? Like you're spending time
Yeah.
going, well, am I messaging this correctly? And is it consistent with how I'm doing it over here? And, and that kind of thing. And do you see a lot of people that struggle with similar things like that, where either they're thinking about it too much, or maybe, to your point, they don't have that audience that they're really trying to go for on that platform? Is that pretty regular?
Yeah, absolutely. I think most people want to streamline things to make it easier. And it is, when you streamline it, it is easier. However, even though, Danny has an Instagram, a Facebook, and a LinkedIn, Danny operates different on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, right? Where Instagram is more of a social touch. It's more of a feel good, heart touch application
Right.
for most people. They post like their favorite food, the
Right.
vacation they went on,
Maybe
the
that's
cool
why I'm
thing they just
terrible at
bought.
Instagram, because in my head,
Yeah.
I am working in finance. A lot of it is kind of, not necessarily money, but it's rule, not really, but it's like, here's what you do, here's what the result is, here's this kind of thing and that kind of thing. And then I look at people on Instagram and I'm like, I'm so glad you guys are successful, but I just don't get
Yeah.
it.
It's all about messaging and how you message it, right? So like Instagram is a very touch feel application. Facebook is actually more of a purchasing platform that I've learned, as well as it's a little, can be more risque on what you post, meaning people feel more transparent to share their feelings on Facebook than they do on Instagram.
Gotcha.
And so it could become a more customer service platform for you.
Gotcha.
And then where you have LinkedIn, tends to be completely professional, focus on the job, focus on networking type of platform. So
Sure.
it's more about utilizing and understanding the audiences,
Right.
and then having your product or your business still there and relevant,
Yeah.
but it is actually just messaging different to different audiences. I'll take that back. It's not really different audiences. It's just different behaviors of the same audience.
Gotcha.
So they're
That
just
makes
looking at things
that
differently.
makes sense. That makes
Yeah.
sense. And so that would also lead me to believe, I mean, I would think, as doing the executive coaching, you do probably tend to get more response, more hits, that kind of a thing from a LinkedIn. But then do you find that those people that you're connecting with there will tend to follow you elsewhere, and they like to see the all encompassing, where they appreciate the segmentation that you're doing, and they see that as one piece of, each of those is a piece of the whole service that you're providing?
Yeah. Actually, my coaching boomed because of Instagram. I changed the messaging.
Of course. Why would I have
Um,
thought it might have been the other
and
way?
yeah, and so
Yeah.
yeah, as soon as I started motivating people, it became this following, and it started to rapidly follow. So for example, I posted something about motivating yourself, of how you ride your life on the bike. And I mean, within 24 hours, I hit like 8,000 viewers, just because it was, centralized. Now I understand how hashtags works, and I built some of them up. So, but it's
Sure.
not really that. It's about the messaging, and it's about the audience that's there.
Right.
So it was constantly fed over. On LinkedIn, when I start posting something about hospitality, travel, tactics to improve your business strategies, it hits very fast. And I've tested utilizing cycling methods, and it does to some degree, but if I overdo it, it tends to kind of just dilute, because that's not really the audience, right? Or the
Right.
type of audience that is being looked at that on that platform.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, I think, one of the things I would say is you have to understand how each of those platforms work for you. I don't use Twitter or the other stuff that's there just because it's, one, time consuming, and two, it hasn't really been relevant for me.
Sure.
Yeah, maybe one day when I make it really big, I'll hire a social media manager who
Yeah,
will
you just hire
completely tell
somebody.
me I'm wrong.
Well, then
So,
what'll happen is that you'll get an email or something like that from somebody, and it's going to be like, I can't believe you said this on Twitter. And you're like, I haven't looked at Twitter in 6 months. What is that person
right.
managing my Twitter saying?
That happens. I use a social media advisor. So they don't actually write or do the content. I do it all myself, but they do advise me on trends,
Yeah,
and things to think about and things to look at. So I'm learning, but it takes time. You have to read through some of that stuff,
sure.
and also be very open. I think most people think that they see one person doing one thing on social media, and they think that that is what you're supposed to do, or they have to do it just like them. You have to really know who you are and know your
Right.
product and your service, and
Right.
that then helps you build who you are in that platform.
Yeah.
Your audience will come, and it's not about the number of people. I mean, I have people who do what I do who have a lot more followers than me, and also some that are very less,
Yeah.
and they have more customers than me, sometimes.
Right.
And some of
Right.
them who have way more have way less customers than me,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Exactly.
it's
Exactly.
just it's a figurative. You have to really think
Yeah.
about, who you are and what your messaging is.
And is this type of stuff that you're kind of advising me on, and the audience on, is these some of the same kinds of conversations that you have with some of the executives that you're coaching, or do you tend to find that it does tend to more go back to, as we were discussing earlier, what is a good way to be able to motivate my team, or how do I become more
Sure.
inspirational? How do you tend to
Yeah.
find a lot of the executives that the issues that they're presenting to you?
Yeah, I think most people, when they realize the first stage that they need help, right? They've maybe read a book, or they've gotten some feedback from a manager that they report to, or they're just at a point where it's like things are just not connecting the way they used to.
Yeah.
And so they'll come to me, and we start to discover things together. And I think in that journey, most people, and I would say this in general, most people want to do a good job. They
Yeah.
want to be a good dad or a good mom, or
Right.
they want to be a good partner or they want to be a good employee or a good manager to their people. They just are missing something. They can't see it. A lot of times they can feel it, but
Yeah.
they cannot see it. So my job is to help them discover what that job that is. And through that journey, know that it's not going to be just a month or two. Here's a couple conversations, and boom, you're on your
Sure.
way. In that case, I always say, well, you probably should then go read a book, because this is an investment of your time, not just
Right.
money, but of your time.
Yeah.
And we're going to kind of go through the weeds. It's going to be uncomfortable.
Sure.
I'm going to push you, and you're going to have to step up to those challenges and really help build clarity
Yeah.
of who you are and what you're capable of.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people look at, I'm being compared to someone else, therefore I have to be someone else. And
Sure.
I challenge them the other way. Know who you are. What
Yeah.
is it that you want to be? And what's the journey that's going to take to get there?
Yeah.
And when you know that, and you really have clarity on that, the boundaries are relieved, right? You really can go anywhere,
Yeah.
as once you understand that. So I always challenge people to kind of help build up some of that framework, and I work with them to do that. And that's
Yeah.
really, that framework is constantly changing because their life is changing.
Right.
I have a client who all of a sudden, boom, twins just came in the picture. So
Remember all that stuff
so
I
we're
told you
now
about setting all of this for the future? Let's just erase that and change it a little bit.
right, exactly, because now your life is going to be consumed by these two babies, right?
Right.
So, but
Right.
how do you become a strong parent? How do you start today when they're born to really know that you have the foundations because they look up to you? The first 3 years of a child's life, they are a sponge. They're learning everything that you are offering. So if you are not strong, if you don't have a good work ethic in the way you do things, think about those things in how you display them, because that's exactly how they're going to learn. They're going to learn off you.
Now, do you find then at this point in time, because you've been doing, the executive coaching for a little while, that you end up playing therapist a little bit more than you thought you would when you first, got started?
It definitely can feel like that sometimes. I think that, the one thing with any coaches, you have to hear out your client, right? You have to understand what they're going through, and you have to have empathy and understand what that's like. Mostly because you want to relate, and I can relate to all of them. And if, I don't have children of my own, but I understand what the complications it takes, right? So with that, I think when most people come to me, they're looking for tools, resources to help effectively do their work, either at home or at work, or both. And it tends to mostly be both. And it really helps them do that. Now, if they're needing something more medical or therapeutic when it comes to a medical professional, I usually recommend that. I'm like, hey, let's add that to the plate. Like, let's spend some time, maybe that's something you and your partner can work through. Again, if someone comes to me with challenges with their partner, I'm like, I can't help you, just you with your partnership. It takes two. So either you both get on the call, or you both go seek out a therapist to do that, so, but however, when a lot of times when they're looking at like, I'm having a really hard time with my team, I'm motivating them and getting them to step up to the next challenge, or more recently, how do I motivate my team during COVID times? We haven't seen each other in almost a year. How do I stay in touch with them? So those are the types of things that we work on. And a lot of times there are behaviors that someone is doing, or activities that we are doing, that we don't realize are actually hindering those things. So we go through some of what life is like. I'm like, show me your agenda. I want to see your Outlook calendar. How much time are you spending on prepping for that meeting? What are some of the goals that you have for that meeting? How are you following up with it? And a lot of times managers are like, oh, I'm just going off this list that I just got emailed 20 minutes ago. I'm like, then why are you having the meeting? The most important time.
And you bring up a good point too, because again, when we were both at Hilton and you were my director, and so you weren't quite at that C-suite, there are obviously people that were above you. When you got into this world, did you find that they were basically like normal people, right? They have a lot of the same struggles, because a lot of times, like I mentioned early on, you would see somebody who would kind of occupy that level, and you wouldn't think that they would have a concern with having an agenda for a meeting, right? You would think, well, how is it that you managed to get to where you are and that be a concern? And so was some of that a little eye-opening when you kind of started to help and support a lot of these guys, doing your coaching?
That's a great question, because I think one would assume that people at a C level, these exec levels, would be they have so much framework and so much experience on and setting that up, and really are well prepared. Most of them are not. Why? Because they're being pulled in so many different directions.
That makes sense.
And they're having to spend so much time on so many other elements that they forget that core preparation of work goes back to clarity, that spending time doing that every day.
And so they probably know the importance, right? Like they understand how important it is. I would assume too, you probably have had clients that have gone, oh my gosh, I used to be so good at this, and I used to be so good at that. And now, to your point, because of X, Y, and Z, that's the kind of stuff that helped me get where I am. And then I've slowly lost that over time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very common for most of us, and especially us as entrepreneurs, we start to add on more things, right? Let's add on more stuff. Let's add this to our plate. Let's maybe put that in my schedule. Oh, I'm going to do this training. Oh, I definitely want to make this part of my business. We add all these things. And what happens is we have to go back and look at our day and say, okay, what am I working on? Why am I working on it? What are the main things that have to be done this week or this day or this month? And make sure I'm building activities around them. And when you do that, And when you're clearly focused, don't get me wrong, it is hard, even as a challenge
Yeah.
for me
It's a
as
lot
a
easier
coach
said than done.
myself,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. But to be disciplined to do that, you get a lot more done, and the impact of the activities you do, even though they may be smaller, are much greater to your organization and to your business than doing 100 of them.
Yeah.
So you're right. I think when most middle managers actually get trained that way, they get trained to focus on the core things, the most important things, because upper management is like, that's what I want you to focus on. Focus on the core things, take care of the people, make sure
Right.
the activities are done, make sure we make money. And so they focus on those three things. They do a good job. When they move up, they start to spread a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, in fact, actually, that's when you should be at your best doing
Yeah.
it. And a lot of the execs I coach, I'm like, tell me what life is like for the entry level associate that is working today.
Yeah.
Many of them are like, I haven't spent time with that person. I'm like, ooh,
Right.
well, you need to do that.
Yeah.
Put that on your calendar. Like,
Yeah.
spend an hour with them.
You don't need to
get
meet with
to
your
know
managers
them.
for the 10th time this week. How about you bring in some of those, those actual working guys?
Exactly. Like, ask them the hard questions of how to improve your business. They're wonderful at giving you those answers because you know why? They're actually doing it. They're hearing what the customers are saying.
Right.
So I love doing that a lot of times, even within my own business. If I hire some contractors to do some work,
Sure.
especially with a struggling hotel, and we're just trying to, I had a hotel I was working with. All the ideas I had did not work at all. And I had tried everything that I could think of.
Sure.
And so I said, wait, there's one thing I'm not doing. What I teach my own clients, I asked the contractor, I said, what are we missing? And he had like 3 things on his list. He's like, I wish we would just do these 3 things because that's exactly what needs to happen.
Right.
And I will tell you, we did the 3 things and it changed the game of how we were performing.
Now you obviously get credit for at least one of those things, right? You're like, look, we'll try 3. You get credit for 2. I get credit for 1. That way we all win, right?
Right. I wish I actually gave that person all the credit. I was like, you are the champion, the leader, and, I think it goes back to being humble. Part of your leadership is that sometimes we get busy and we forget that the simple things, the humble things really do matter.
Absolutely.
And, our line associates are the key to our success. They're not just executing the job, but they're actually the stakeholders to many of our answers.
Right.
And so a lot of I tell my execs that I'm coaching is like, ask them, what is it like? What are they going through? And the more that they spend time with them, and I'm not meaning, managing their activities or holding them accountable. It's more of understanding what they're going through. What are the challenges? What's working? What's not? And what are some of the ideas? And
do you relate a lot of that over to the revenue management side? I know you used one of the examples with a client, but my guess is one of the reasons why you're so good at being able to pull all 3 of these different businesses together is that there is a lot of commonality and how you take even being a spin instructor to executive coaching, to revenue management. And so do you find that you actually learn a lot on the executive coaching side that you do apply to, I know you mentioned before revenue management strategies and tools and that kind of thing, but being able to kind of motivate and inspire them to also try those things. So you find that there's a lot of good overlap.
Absolutely. I think the one thing that's key to me is I know who I am and what my purpose in life is, and that's to serve people. I was born on this earth to serve people. And so I do that in all 3 of my businesses that I work with. And the more you serve people, the more people want to follow you. They're engaged with you, right? So even if you don't have all the right answers,
Sure,
but you have the right intention,
right,
people will still follow you, even if they have to discover a little bit more on their own, which
yeah,
is totally fine. I said a full turn, maybe it was actually more like a turn and a half,
yeah,
right?
right,
Just to know what it was like. Maybe I said, this is the strategy you need to put in place
sure,
on your segmentation of business. But
sure,
really what it means is that I need to add a couple more things to that strategy to make it even better.
right,
So you're absolutely right. I think you have to know who you are as a business professional. You may
yeah,
have different likes and wants, but what is the core purpose of who you are?
right,
And that's something that I truly have always embraced. And I spent some time in my career. I took a break to really discover who I was before I started. And I said, okay, this is who I am.
yep,
And I know exactly what I'm here for. And I've always kept the service at heart. And it's made my life and my business much easier to launch because of
Yeah.
that.
No, I get it. And I know one of the episodes that I did on the podcast was on compassion capitalism. And it talked a lot about how people tend to get focused on bottom line performance, and they don't always realize that sometimes to increase and grow the bottom line, sometimes all you need is, to your point, right? Some servant leadership. You throw a little
Yeah.
passion in there, and your team becomes more productive. You retain clients better, and all of that actually rolls down to the bottom line, and it can increase productivity and growth in an area where you don't really have to contribute a lot of additional, there's no capital expenditure costs, right? There's no real additional training costs. You don't have to bring on a bigger team. You just motivate, and you help lead by, by serving. And so that's great. It's good to know
Yeah.
at least I got one of these things right, out of
Absolutely. That's why we work together for so long. We work well together. Yeah. It goes back to, I think a lot of times people think customer service is just a transaction, and it's not. It truly is the heart and why you do things. And, if you always have that in front of you, now you have to know who your customers are. And you have to be willing to say no to some customers, which I had before, and say, I'm just not a good fit for you, even though you're like, I want the money, I want that check.
Yeah.
But if you're not a good service to them, then it's going to be hell working with them.
Yeah.
It'd be hell for you and hell for them, right? So you have to look at and say, okay, I need to be very comfortable knowing who my customer is, and that I'm going to love them like none other. Because then if a customer has to leave you, let's say they moved on or they're going to do something differently, you want to make sure it's really hard for them to say no.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And the reason why is, even though they're still saying no, later on, they will say yes to something else. Or later on, they're going to say, you know what, you need to work with him. Yeah. Most of my business, way more than that, about 75% of my business is actually all referral based. Because of that reason, someone's worked with me, and maybe, we had an agreement for a year or 6 months or whatever the case may be. They have now said, you know what, you have to work with him. Right. And it made my job a lot easier when I go back and say, hey, I'm looking for work. I know that I can love the heck out of them. I also know my limitations with that. So I know how much business I can take on. I've made some mistakes along the way where I took on too much, and I went back and I said, okay, how do I scale this to be differently?
Sure.
And you will do that as a business owner. I also know that what is a good mediocre of where I could still drive the business, but still love the heck out of my customers.
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually going to see if you had any, parting words with a couple minutes left, but I don't think it's going to get better than that.
Yeah.
So I mean, is there any specific social media that you'd like to plug? I know we don't have to worry about plugging a Twitter account, but throw the social media out there, and I'll make sure I include it in the show notes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. For Instagram, come see me at Mo_Herrera. So that's MOE_HERRERA. And then you're more than welcome to add me on LinkedIn, which is Moses Herrera. Luckily, there's only 2 other guys, so I'm the guy in the suit.
Nice. As opposed to Danny Hudson, where at one point in time, I think I friend requested the only other Danny Hudson on Facebook. And I'm pretty sure now there's like 1,000 of us. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to be friends with you. Well, that's perfect. I mean, I know for one, coming out of this, I feel a lot more motivated, and it's nice to know too, that there are a lot of people that are taking similar philosophies that you and I have when it comes to those kinds of things. And you're seeing great success, in your own business and in life. And other people can hopefully use that as a model and say, hey, you know what, maybe I don't necessarily have to cut hours, or I don't have to do this to be able to drive those successes, that there are other ways to do things. And so I appreciate it. I had a lot of fun. The 40 minutes just kind of flew by. So I super appreciate it. And we'll have to do it again.
Absolutely. I would love to.
All right, Moses. All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.